All right, we're diving into one of the biggest questions in all of tech. How do you build something that can just keep growing without totally collapsing on itself? It's this core challenge where your own success can become your worst enemy. So, how do you pull it off? Let's get into it. Every popular app sooner or later hits what we call the scaling ceiling. It's that exact moment when your thing gets so popular, the very foundation it's built on just starts to crack. The system just can't keep up. So, how do you prepare for that? How do you build for 1 million users when you've only got 10? Okay, to make sense of all this, let's use a really simple analogy. Just forget about servers and databases for a second. Instead, picture this. You run a super popular food truck. The line is always around the block. Your challenge? You've got to serve everybody without making them wait forever or messing up the food. This simple food truck problem, it's the key to understanding everything else we're going to talk about. So, what's your first instinct? It's probably the most obvious one, right? If you need to serve more people, you just get a bigger, better food truck. More grill space, a huge fridge, maybe a faster engine. This is the first and honestly the most intuitive way to scale. And in the tech world, this has a name. It's called vertical scaling, or just scaling up. All it means is you take your one server and you make it way more powerful. You add more processing power, that's the CPU, or more memory, the RAM. You're not really changing the system, you're just beefing up the machine it runs on. So, let's bring it back to our analogy. Vertical scaling is just buying a bigger, faster, more efficient food truck. It's still just one truck, one chef, one menu. Everything is in one place, which, and this is the important part, makes it incredibly simple to manage. And what's really wild is that this is exactly how one of the biggest apps in the world got its start. When Instagram launched, it was just 3 engineers running everything on a single, simple database. Now, you might be thinking, why on earth would they do that? Didn't they know they'd get huge? Well, the answer is that simplicity, that was their superpower. Yeah, they managed to avoid the ultimate trap, over-engineering. See, trying to build a super complex system for 1 billion users on day one is a classic mistake. It just kills your most valuable asset as a startup, your speed. Instead of building features that people actually wanted, like cool photo filters, they would have been stuck messing with network infrastructure that nobody would ever even see. And this timeline just perfectly shows how far they got with that simple, bigger truck idea. By the end of 2011, they were serving 14 million users, all by basically just clicking a button on Amazon to rent a bigger server. They just focused on the product, and it worked, right up until the moment it didn't. Because every single truck operation, it doesn't matter how big and powerful that truck gets, eventually it hits a hard physical limit. There's a point where you just can't make it any bigger. And that's exactly what happened to Instagram.
So here's the crucial trade-off. Vertical scaling is simple, it's fast, but it's got 2 really fatal flaws. First, it is a single point of failure. If your one big server goes down, your entire app is just offline. And second, there is a very, very real physical ceiling. For Instagram, that ceiling was 30 million users. At that point, they literally could not buy a bigger server from Amazon. The motherboard just couldn't hold any more RAM. Their one food truck had reached its absolute maximum size. They were completely out of options. So this crisis, it forced them to totally change their philosophy. If you can't build a bigger truck, you've got to do something completely different. It was time to stop thinking about a single truck and start thinking about building an entire fleet. This new approach is called horizontal scaling, or scaling out. Instead of making one machine more and more powerful, you just add more machines to the system and spread the work across all of them. So in our analogy, you're no longer the owner of one giant super truck. Nope, you are now the manager of a whole fleet of regular-sized food trucks, all serving customers at the same time. Now this sounds amazing in theory, but it introduces a massive new problem.
So what's so hard about adding more trucks? Well, now you need a whole new layer of management, what we call orchestration. You need a load balancer to act like a traffic cop, telling customers which truck is the least busy. You need a way for all the trucks to talk to each other and agree on how many burgers they've sold. All of a sudden, the complexity just skyrockets. And this diagram here, it just perfectly visualizes the problem. See, adding more servers, it solves your load and data problems, for sure. But it creates this whole new dimension of scale, complexity. You're no longer just cooking food, you're basically managing logistics for a huge distributed organization. So how did Instagram actually manage this incredibly complex switch? They had to figure out a way to split their one massive database across a whole fleet of new servers. And the way they did it, it was absolutely brilliant. They used a technique called database sharding. Sharding is kind of like taking your one enormous recipe book and splitting it into thousands of smaller, specialized notebooks. Each food truck in your fleet now only gets the recipes it actually needs, which makes everything way faster and more efficient. But here's the real genius move. Instead of splitting their data into a few big chunks for each physical server, they created thousands of tiny logical shards. You can think of them like virtual data buckets. Many of these little buckets could live on a single server, and this gave them incredible flexibility. If one server got too busy, they didn't have to do some massive, chaotic data migration. They could just pick up a few of those little buckets and move them to a new, emptier server with zero downtime. It was amazing. So we've looked at two totally different ways to grow: the simple, bigger truck, and the complex fleet of trucks. And this brings us to the core principle, the single biggest takeaway for anyone who's designing a system. As you can see, there's no single right answer here. It is always a trade-off. Do you go for a simplicity and speed right now, but risk having a single point of failure? Or do you build for infinite scale right from the start, but deal with that crushing weight of complexity? The huge lesson from Instagram's story is this: let the pain be your guide. Don't add complexity until you absolutely have to. They stuck with that simple, single truck model until it was literally on fire and could not serve one more customer. Only then did they embrace the complexity of building a fleet. Solve the problems you have today, not the problems you might have in 5 years. And all of this leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought. We've just watched a system evolve from this rigid, single structure into a flexible network that can actually heal and adapt. So is the future of system design less like building a skyscraper and more like growing a forest? A living ecosystem that just adapts on its own to survive? It's a powerful idea. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.